Christianity, Islam, and secular science have their answers. But what did the very first mystics say? The ones who wrote before all three, before the churches were built, before the mosques were raised, before the laboratories existed, before any of the world's great traditions had formed their creeds and their certainties and their carefully constructed answers to the question that every human being has ever asked, there were other voices, ancient voices so old they predate the ink we use to record them. And those voices, whispering across 3,000 years of time, had something to say about where you go when you leave this body, something that has been buried, something that has been misunderstood, something that, if you hear it fully today, may change the way you are living right now. Because here is the truth, that most people never discover the question of what happens after death is not only a question about the future, it is a question about the present. How you understand the destination changes, how you walk the road. And you need to hear this. Today, not someday. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you to do something. If this video is already resonating with something inside you, if there is a part of you that feels, even now, that you were meant to hear this, then take a moment and type in the comments below these 5 words, "My soul remembers the way home." That declaration matters. It is not just a comment. It is an affirmation that something in you already knows what we are about to uncover together. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell so that the next time ancient wisdom surfaces like this, you will be there to receive it. Now, let us begin. I want to speak to something you may be carrying right now, not on the surface, where you manage the schedule and return the messages and hold yourself together with both hands. I am talking about what lives underneath all of that. The thing that wakes you at 3 in the morning and sits on the edge of your bed without saying a word. The thing that comes when you are driving alone, or standing in the shower, or sitting at a table full of people who are laughing at something that suddenly seems very far away. It is the weight of not knowing. The heaviness of wondering whether any of this means anything. Whether the people you have loved and lost are simply gone. Whether you yourself are simply going to be gone. One day, as if you never existed at all. You have been told certain things. Maybe you were raised in a faith tradition that gave you its answer. And you believed it. Or you tried to believe it. Or you went through the motions of believing it. Maybe you walked away from that tradition and science became your framework. And you found comfort in the idea that matter and energy are neither created nor destroyed. That nothing is truly lost, just transformed. Maybe you sit in a strange middle space, holding multiple answers loosely, not quite certain which one to commit to. Afraid to look too directly at the question because the question is so enormous that looking at it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff. Are you tired of not knowing? Have you ever wondered if the answer was always there, hidden in plain sight, written in a language older than the one your questions are asked in? Do you feel, somewhere in the deepest part of yourself, that the soul is real, that you are more than this body, but you have never found words adequate enough to describe what you already instinctively sense? I understand. I have stood in that same place. I have held that same weight. My name is Daniel Eliezer. I am 71 years old. I have spent the last 46 years of my life studying the ancient Jewish mystical texts, the Talmud, the Midrash, the Zohar, the traditions of the Kabbalah, not as an academic project, not as something to put on a shelf and admire, but as a survival practice. because there was a season in my life when I needed to know whether the soul survives, whether the one I love survived, and I was not willing to accept a comfortable, untested answer. I needed the oldest answers. The ones that came before comfort was even a concern. What I found in those ancient texts changed me, not because they gave me certainty in the way that a mathematical proof gives certainty, but because they gave me something more precious than certainty. They gave me a map of the soul's journey drawn by people who had wrestled with this question so seriously, so relentlessly, so brilliantly, across so many generations, that the accumulated weight of their thinking had a gravity of its own. And what is written in that map is not what most people expect. Let me tell you where we have to start. Because the beginning of the answer is not where most people look for it. Most people begin with what happens after death. But the ancient Jewish mystics began with what the soul is before it dies. They understood, with a clarity that still staggers me, that you cannot understand the destination until you understand the traveler. So let us understand the traveler. The Hebrew scriptures use three primary words to describe the soul, and they do not use them interchangeably. Each word carries a distinct weight, a distinct meaning, a distinct revelation about the nature of what it means to be a living human being. Pay attention to the next sentence. The first word is Nefesh. Nefesh is derived from the Hebrew root that suggests rest, settling, the quality of something that finds its place. It is the aspect of the soul that is most intimately woven into the physical body, into the blood, into the lived, sensory, embodied experience of being alive. When Scripture says in Leviticus that the life of the flesh is in the blood, the word used for life there is Nefesh. This is the part of you that feels hunger and warmth and cold and desire. The part that exists inside experience. The Nefesh is not lesser for being physical. It is the anchor. It is the ground floor of the soul's architecture. The second word is Ruach. Ruach means wind. Ruach means breath. Ruach means spirit. It is the animating force that sits between the physical and the transcendent. The word used in Genesis when God's Spirit moved over the waters before creation began. The Ruach is the dimension of the soul associated with speech, with emotion, with the movement between inner life and outer expression. It is what makes you capable of being moved, of being struck by beauty, of saying words that carry weight beyond their letters. The Ruach is why music can undo you in 30 seconds. It is why the right sentence from the right person at the right moment can restructure something inside you permanently. The third word is Neshama. Neshama is breath in its most exalted sense. The root of the word is Neshima, which simply means to breathe. And yet, when the Torah uses it in Genesis when it describes God breathing into the nostrils of the first human being a nishmat chaim, a breath of living souls, it is describing something that transcends ordinary breath entirely. The neshama is the aspect of the soul closest to its divine source. It is associated with thought, with wisdom, with the capacity to know and to be known by the infinite. The ancient teachers described it this way: while the nefesh is in the body, the neshama does not exist within a person in the usual sense, but hovers around them, an eternal flame of divine origin that the physical self can approach but never fully contain. Not three fragments, not three competing ideas, three layers of a single magnificent reality that is the human soul. And the ancient teachers added this image, which comes from the Zohar, the great medieval mystical text that stands as one of the crowning achievements of Jewish spiritual literature. They describe the soul like the flame of a candle, At the bottom, clinging to the wick, is a dark light that is the Nefesh. Rooted in the physical, above it burns a white light that is the Ruach, the emotional, spiritual, middle dimension. And above that, barely perceivable, almost impossible to look at directly, is a light that cannot be fully discerned, that is the Neshama, the highest dimension of the soul, the part that is always reaching back toward the source from which it came. You are not a body. You are a flame, layered, complex, luminous. Now, the question becomes, what happens to that flame when the wick goes out? Listen to me carefully. The ancient Jewish texts do not speak with one voice on this question. Let me be honest with you about that, because I will not give you a false simplicity when the truth is more beautiful in its complexity. The earliest strata of the Hebrew scriptures speak of a place called Sheol in Hebrew. The word is related to a root suggesting hollowness, a vast underground hollowness. Sheol appears 65 times in the Hebrew Bible. Jacob invokes it in grief when he believes his son Joseph is dead. Jonah cries out from something like it in the belly of the great fish. The Psalms speak of being brought low into it and being raised out of it. In the earliest picture the ancient Israelites held, Sheol was simply where the dead went a dim, a shadowy underworld, not unlike the conception of Hades in Greek thought, a place of neither reward nor punishment, but simply of waiting, of persistence without vitality. That changes everything about how you read the early texts, because it means the Israelites were not people who initially comforted themselves with images of paradise. They sat with the rawness of death without a safety net of easy answers. They let the weight of mortality be fully weighted. And out of that sitting, out of that willingness to hold the question without flinching, a deeper revelation slowly emerged. By the Second Temple period, roughly 500 years before the Common Era, through the 1st century, the picture had grown richer and more differentiated. The word Gehinnom entered the conversation. In its most literal, historical sense, the word refers to the Valley of Hinnom, a place outside Jerusalem with a terrible history. But in the developing tradition of the rabbis and mystics, Gehinnom became something entirely different. It became a metaphor, a spiritual reality, a temporary state of purification. Listen to what the Zohar says about it, and I am rendering the spirit of the teaching without inventing the words. It describes certain places in Gehinnom where souls that have been polluted by their time in the physical world are purified, cleansed, made white, and then ascend toward the heavenly regions. Not punishment without end, purification with purpose. The ancient tradition was nearly unanimous on this point. The maximum duration of the Gehinnom process is 12 months. The soul is not destroyed, it is refined. And then comes Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, which the tradition reimagines not as a geographical location somewhere in the ancient Near East, but as a state of soul, a dimension of spiritual reality, a condition of being in which the soul dwells in increasing closeness to the divine light from which it came. The rabbis taught that the righteous enter Gan Eden and experience something that defies language, a quality of knowing, of understanding, of seeing the true nature of things from which the veil of physical life had hidden them. The Mishnah preserves this image. One sage said that this world is like a lobby before Olam Haba, the world to come. You do not live in a lobby. You pass through it. The lobby is not the destination. Are you feeling the shift in this? Have you noticed what the ancient teachers were doing? Do you see how radically different this map is from the flat, binary heaven or hell picture that entered so many traditions later? Because the Jewish mystical vision of the afterlife is not a verdict, it is a journey. A continuing journey, a soul in motion. Let me take you deeper into what the Kabbalistic tradition, particularly the tradition preserved in the Zohar, teaches about the specific stages of that journey. Because this is where the map becomes extraordinarily detailed, extraordinarily precise, extraordinarily unlike anything the world's popular religious imagination has tended to picture. The first stage begins immediately after death. It is called Hibut HaKafer, which can be translated as the pangs of the grave or the binding of the grave. The Zohar teaches that in the days immediately following death, the soul undergoes a process of separation, a painful, disorienting loosening of the deep attachments between the spiritual self and the physical life it has inhabited. Think of it this way. You have spent a lifetime weaving yourself into the fabric of the physical world. Your habits, your loves, your fears, your history, and your sense of who you are, all of it is wrapped tightly around the flesh. When the body stops, all of that does not instantly dissolve. The soul must release, it must let go of what it cannot carry. This process, the tradition suggests, takes time. The Zohar speaks of 7 days. Pause and consider that for a moment. 7 days. The Jewish mourning tradition, from the period called Shiva, which means 7 mirrors, exactly this understanding. The family of the deceased sits together for 7 days, not simply as a cultural custom. They are participating in a cosmic process. While the mourners sit in the house of grief, something is happening to the soul of the one they loved. A loosening, a gentling, a release from the weight of the physical world. Stop right there. That is not grief management. That is sacred technology, thousands of years old. The second stage is the process of Gehinnom that I mentioned earlier, not as a place of punishment, but as a furnace of purification. The Kabbalistic teachers were quite specific about what is being purified. It is not the crimes of a life, it is the attachments, the distortions, the places where the soul, in the course of living a human life, became tangled in patterns that pulled it away from its own essential nature. Every human being who lives a human life picks up this kind of residue. This is not moral condemnation. This is spiritual physics. The soul that has been embedded in a physical body, navigating desire and fear and grief and pride, inevitably accumulates layers that do not belong to its truest self. Gehinnom, in the Kabbalistic understanding, is the great unraveling of those layers, a refinement, a returning to essence. And the tradition places the maximum duration of this process at 12 months. This is why the Kaddish, the memorial prayer that Jewish mourners traditionally recite for 11 months after the death of a parent, is recited for precisely that period. Not 12 months, but 11. Because to say Kaddish for the full 12 months implies that your loved one needed the maximum period of purification, you say 11 out of love, out of the assumption that they were already moving through more quickly than the outer limit. Read that again. That ritual contains a theology of hope embedded in the arithmetic of love. The third stage is Gan Eden itself, the lower and upper realms of the paradise state. The tradition describes the soul in Gan Eden not as passive, not as simply resting or waiting, but as active, learning, growing, understanding. In some of the most beautiful passages in this literature, the souls in Gan Eden are described as studying, being taught, receiving the comprehension that physical life did not have room to contain. The limitations of the body, the limitations of time and distraction and sleep and hunger and fear, those limitations fall away, and what remains is the soul in its essential luminosity. able now to perceive and to know with a clarity that the embodied life could only glimpse in its most exalted moments. Imagine standing in a darkened room for your entire life, seeing shapes, feeling warmth, knowing that somewhere beyond the walls there is a vast, brilliant landscape, but never quite being able to see it directly. Now imagine the walls simply dissolving. That is the image the ancient teachers reach for when they try to speak of Gan Eden. And beyond Gan Eden, the tradition speaks of a higher realm, a treasury of souls, a place called Tzror HaKayim, the bundle of the living, where the soul in its most essential form is held in the keeping of the divine. Scripture itself contains this image. When David is told in 1 Samuel that his own soul will be bound in the bundle of the living with God, this phrase becomes, in the mystical tradition, a description of the soul's ultimate resting place between journeys, not disappearance, not absorption into nothingness, the most intimate possible proximity to the source of all being. Now, I want to tell you about something the tradition teaches that most people in the Western world never encounter. And it is this: the soul's journey does not necessarily end with Gan Eden. There is an ancient Jewish teaching about Gilgul Neshamot, the cycling of souls. Gilgul means wheel or cycle. Neshamot means souls. The doctrine holds that souls may return, that the journey of refinement and completion may require more than one passage through the physical world. This is not a peripheral idea in Jewish mysticism. It is woven deeply into the Kabbalistic tradition. But listen carefully to how the tradition frames this, because it is different from how reincarnation tends to be popularly understood. The soul does not return because it failed. The soul may return because something remains unfinished, because there is a depth of goodness not yet fully realized, because there is someone to help. The tradition even suggests that some souls return out of a kind of love not for their own sake, but for the sake of the world they left behind, drawn back by the pull of care and connection and the desire to contribute to what the tradition calls tikkun olam, the mending or repairing of the world. That changes everything about how you think of the people around you. What if the soul sitting across from you at the table has been here before? What if the love you feel for someone, the instant recognition, the sense that you have always known this person, even though you have only recently met, what if the ancient teachers would have smiled at that and said, "Yes, of course. That is because you have." I want to bring this teaching down from the realm of the abstract and into the room where you are sitting right now. Because ancient wisdom that stays in the clouds is not serving you. Let us make it practical. The first practice this teaching invites is this: treat this life as the sacred preparation it actually is. The tradition says that Pirkei Avot, the ethics of the fathers, one of the most beloved texts of rabbinic literature, contains this teaching. Attributed to Rabbi Yaakov, this world is like a passageway before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the passageway so that you may be worthy to enter the banquet room. A passageway is not nothing. A passageway is where the preparation happens. You do not sleep in a passageway. You do not waste time in a passageway. You move through it with intention, because what you do in the passageway determines what you carry with you into the room on the other side. What are you carrying? What are you building in this passageway that you call your life? Not in terms of wealth or reputation or the accumulation of things that will stay here when you go, but in terms of the quality of your attention, the depth of your love, the choices you are making right now about who you are becoming. The second practice this teaching invites is this: release the fear of death by befriending the reality of the soul. Fear of death is in almost every case. Fear of disappearance, fear of cessation, fear of the self simply going dark, like a screen powering down. But the ancient teachers looked at this fear directly and said, "You are not the screen. You are the light that the screen was trying, imperfectly, to display." The screen ends. The light does not. If you carry that understanding, not as a religious belief you have been told to hold, but as a living conviction you have arrived at through your own engagement with the evidence, it changes the texture of your daily life. Not because you become indifferent to life, the opposite, because you stop wasting it on the small fears and the petty anxieties and the relentless management of an ego that already suspects it is temporary. You begin to live from the depth that is actually eternal. You begin to let the Neshama, the highest layer of the soul, become the organizing principle of your days, rather than the Nefesh alone, which is too easily frightened. The third practice this teaching invites is pray for and remember the dead, not as a performance, but as a participation in their ongoing journey. The tradition understood something that modern secular culture has mostly forgotten: the relationship between the living and the dead does not terminate at the grave. The prayers of the living, the acts of goodness done in memory of those who have passed, the recitation of Kaddish, these are understood in the tradition as real contributions to the soul's process, not magic, not superstition, a recognition that love is not bounded by the limitations of the physical world, that what you do in this life in honor of the ones who have gone reaches them. You might think that is a beautiful sentiment. The ancient teachers thought it was cosmically true. But there is something else about the Gehinnom teaching that I do not want to skip past, because it is one of the most pastorally powerful ideas in the entire tradition. The rabbis taught that on the Sabbath, on the seventh day, the day of rest, Gehinnom is emptied. The souls within it are given 1 day of reprieve, 1 day of closeness to the divine presence, 1 day of relief from the process of purification. And this single detail, which sounds at first like a small poetic flourish, carries enormous theological weight, because it means that even the harshest teaching in the Jewish tradition about what happens after death is bounded by mercy. The Sabbath finds even the souls in their most difficult passage. The divine rest is not reserved only for the righteous. It is extended even there, even into the places of purification, even to the souls still in their process. I find that thought more comforting than almost any other in this entire literature. Not because it makes light of the work of becoming whole, but because it tells you that the work is done in the presence of love, that the refiner's fire is held in the hands of a refiner who does not abandon the metal even for a moment, who builds rest into the very structure of the process. You are not alone in your becoming. Not in this life. Not in the next. And the fourth practice, and this one may surprise you, is this: take seriously the possibility that you have been here before, and that the loves and losses and unresolved longings of your life are not random. They may be exactly what this particular passage through the world was meant to address. The grief you cannot shake, the wound you cannot explain, the calling you feel but cannot name. The ancient mystics would not dismiss any of these as psychological noise. They would lean in and ask, what is the soul trying to complete? What did it come back to finish? What love is it still reaching for? Not every question you ask about your life is a question about your life alone. Some of them are questions that reach much further back than the day you were born. There is one more dimension of this teaching I want to give you before we move into the final part of this conversation. And it is a dimension that the ancient teachers approached with great care and great reverence. It is the question of what the soul experiences in the actual moment of death. Not before it, not after it, in it. The Talmudic and Kabbalistic literature speaks about this with remarkable specificity, and I want to handle it responsibly, which means I will share the spirit of the teaching without claiming to know more than the tradition itself claimed to know. What emerges from the texts is this: the moment of death is not understood as an abrupt severing. It is understood as a separation that happens in stages, corresponding to the layers of the soul, the Nefesh, the part most deeply embedded in the physical, releases last and most reluctantly. It is why the tradition speaks of the soul hovering near the body in the early days after death, not as a ghost story, but as a recognition that the leaving takes time, that the connection between spirit and body, forged over a lifetime of shared experience, does not snap like a thread cut by scissors. It releases like a hand gently opening. This is why the Jewish practice of staying with the deceased, of not leaving the body alone in the hours and days before burial, carries spiritual meaning. It is an act of accompaniment, of honoring the process of release, of saying to the soul, still in the process of letting go, "You are not alone in this passage. We are here. We are witnessing. We are holding the space between where you were and where you are going." That is love in its most ancient form, not grief management, not ritual for the sake of custom, sacred accompaniment. And the tradition teaches something else about this moment, something that I find extraordinarily moving in the instant of death. The soul is said to see clearly. The distortions of ego and fear and the accumulated habits of a lifetime fall away, and the soul perceives, with sudden and complete lucidity, the nature of the life it lived, not as condemnation, as comprehension. The Zohar describes this as the soul coming before a kind of divine court, and the word court here carries the sense not of a criminal proceeding, but of a royal audience. The soul stands before the fullness of truth, and it is known completely, and it knows itself completely. Perhaps for the first time, can you imagine what it would feel like to finally see yourself without the distortions of self-deception and fear, to stand in the full light of what you actually are, without defense, without pretense, and to discover that you are known and held even in that total exposure? That is the teaching. Not judgment as punishment, recognition as grace. I want you to hear what I am about to say. And I want you to hear it not with your mind alone, but with whatever it is inside you that recognized this video the moment it began. Because I believe in a real way that some of the people watching this right now were sent here, not by an algorithm, not by chance, sent. And someone watching this right now, you know exactly who you are. You have been carrying grief about someone you lost, and you have been afraid that they are simply gone. That the person who existed, who laughed in a specific way, who loved you in a specific way, who knew you better than anyone else ever has, that all of that just stopped, and the fear of that has been quietly reshaping everything in your life. Your ability to love freely, your willingness to attach yourself to anything permanent, your capacity for joy, because joy feels dangerous now, because it comes with the knowledge of how completely it can end. Listen to me. The ancient teachers sat with what you are carrying, not with easy answers, with honest engagement, and what they arrived at through generations of wrestling with the hardest human questions. Was this the person you loved is not gone? Not in the way you fear. The relationship did not cease. It changed form. The soul that loved you and was loved by you is on a journey that your eyes cannot follow. But that does not mean the journey has ended. the space between the living and the dead, the ancient tradition says, is a window, not a wall. Let the grief be as large as it needs to be. Grief is the price of love, and it is a price worth paying. But do not let the grief convince you of a lie. The lie that nothing survives, the lie that love itself is mortal. Love is not mortal, not according to the oldest voices we have. And someone else watching this right now is at the beginning of asking these questions. Not because you have lost someone else, but because you have started to feel the weight of your own impermanence. Something in the last months or year has made your own mortality real to you in a way it was not before. Maybe an illness, maybe a number on the calendar that suddenly carries more weight than numbers used to carry. Maybe simply a moment of clarity in a quiet room when you suddenly felt, with great precision, that your time here is specific and limited, and you are trying to figure out whether that is terrifying or clarifying. The ancient teachers would say it is both, and it is supposed to be both, because the awareness of impermanence, held honestly, is one of the great teachers available to a human soul. The Ecclesiastes Kohelet in Hebrew, one of the most radical and searching books in the entire Hebrew canon, wrestles with this openly. It looks at the cycle of life and death without flinching, and embedded in its final chapter, in a verse I want you to carry with you. It says this: "The dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it." Ecclesiastes chapter 12. Verse 7, the dust returns. The spirit returns, not the spirit vanishes, not the spirit concludes. Returns. To return, you have to have come from somewhere. This verse is not an ending. It is a homecoming. And if the spirit returns to God who gave it, then every human soul is, in its deepest nature, alone from the divine, not a creation that becomes independent, not a fragment that breaks off and forgets its origin, a breath breathed out and, in time, breathed back in. The glassblower image that the ancient teachers used stays with me every time I read this verse. When a glassblower forms a vessel, the breath first leaves his lips. It travels as wind, and it comes to rest in the vessel it shapes. The Neshama leaves its source, travels as Ruach, and comes to rest as Nefesh in the physical body. And when the body is done, the process reverses. The Nefesh releases its grip, the Ruach ascends, the Neshama returns, the vessel breaks, the breath goes home. You are the breath, not the vessel. I want to give you something to do with all of this before we close, because wisdom that does not become practice is just beautiful noise. So here is a simple thing I want you to consider doing, not as a religious obligation, not as a ritual you have inherited and do automatically, but as an intentional act of soul attention. Sometime today or tonight, find a few minutes of quiet, not a long time, not a meditation retreat, just a few minutes. And in those minutes, I want you to think of someone you have loved who is no longer in a body, someone who mattered to you, and I want you to speak to them not loudly, not in public, just inwardly, and say what you needed to say, or what you never got to say, or simply, I know you are still on the journey. I know the window is still there. I love you. I release you to where you are going. And then I want you to sit for one moment more and think of yourself, of your own soul, of the fact that you, too, are on a journey that began before this life and will continue after it. And I want you to ask yourself, honestly, what is this passage through the world for? not in a despairing way. In a purposeful way, what is the Neshama? The deepest dimension of who I am. Here to do, to learn, to love, to repair, to contribute, to complete. You do not have to answer it today. But the ancient teachers would tell you that asking the question with genuine seriousness is itself a form of prayer. Because the soul that asks what it is here for has already begun to listen for the answer. And the answer, they believed, always comes. Not always in words. Sometimes in the quality of what finds you, in the people who appear, in the doors that open and the ones that firmly close, in the persistent pull of a direction that defies your conventional logic but resonates at a frequency deeper than thought. That resonance is the Neshama navigating. Trust it more than you trust your fear. I have been walking with these texts for 46 years, and they still surprise me. They still deepen. They still have more to say. The tradition is not a fixed museum piece. It is a living organism of wisdom. And it speaks differently to different questions at different moments in a life. What I have shared with you today is one thread from a vast and gorgeous tapestry. There is so much more. There are teachings in the Zohar about what the soul encounters in the moment of physical death that are so precise, so tender, so cosmically detailed that they read like the accounts of someone who was there. There are Talmudic passages that describe the soul's relationship to the body, even during sleep, how a portion of the soul ascends each night and a portion remains, guarding the body, and how what we call dreams are, in part, the returning impressions of those nightly ascents. There are teachings about the souls of the truly righteous that transcend even the categories of Gan Eden and dwell in realms that the ancient teachers could only gesture toward, could only describe by saying, it is something no eye has seen and no ear has heard. And all of it, every layer of this ancient, complex, magnificent map points in the same direction, not toward extinction, not toward dissolution, toward return, toward homecoming, toward the recognition, in the fullness of time, of what you always were and always have been. My soul remembers the way home. I hope you feel that too, right now, as you reach the end of this teaching. If you do, if something in you has been moved, or shifted, or given language for something it already knew but could not name, then please go to the comments below and type it, "My soul remembers the way home." Let that be more than a comment. Let it be a declaration. Let it be a small act of alignment between the deepest part of you and the ancient wisdom that has been waiting patiently for you to find it. Subscribe to this channel. There is so much more to explore together. There are texts that have not been opened in the popular conversation. There are dimensions of this ancient wisdom tradition that will meet you wherever you are in your own journey and speak directly into it. And now, before we part, and we do not part the way the modern world parts, which is just turning off a screen and moving to the next thing. We part as people who have held something sacred together for the last hour. So let me close with the ancient blessing that is, in my experience, truest to what this teaching has asked us to receive today. May the soul within you that is oldest and wisest begin to guide the self that walks in time. May the grief you carry become a vehicle for understanding, rather than a weight that stops you. May the people you have loved and lost know, in whatever dimension they now inhabit, that they are remembered, that they are loved, that the thread between you is not cut, only stretched across a distance the eye cannot measure. May you walk through the passageway of this life with enough awareness to know what you are building and enough courage to build it well. And when the time comes, not yet, not soon, But someday, may your own return be as a breath returning to the one who breathed it out with love. Go in the wholeness of all that you are. And if you are sitting with questions that this teaching opened rather than closed, good. The best wisdom does that. It does not seal the door of inquiry. It opens it wider. So come back. There is more to explore, more threads to follow, more ancient light to bring into the present moment of your life. The journey of the soul does not end at death, and the journey of understanding the truth does not end with a single video. It deepens, layer by layer, just like the soul itself. The tradition was never meant to be a monument. It was meant to be a living conversation between the generations, between the ancient and the present, between the ones who asked before you and the questions you are carrying right now. You have entered that conversation today. The ancient voices have heard you, and they have something more to say. Come back and listen.